In the last entry to the Making of the Shot series, we'll finally be finishing the shot. Using Adobe After Effects, we're going to combine everything we've been doing for the past 4 videos and have a fully finished animated looking shot. In the first episode, we animated the girl using traditional animation methods. Using the same software in Flash, we colored the girl in the lineless style. We then proceeded in the same program to animate the lanterns and the sparkly effects. In our last video, we painted the background using Photoshop. If you want to review these episodes, check them out. Now that's out of the way, we can start compositing everything we've done into one final shot in After Effects, the final step. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Now we can collect all our files and put them all into one After Effects shot. All my animation SWFs are here, along with my background files. I even have one stock footage, which is just some smoke. I'm not sure if I'll even use this, but it's there just in case. If you guys aren't using Flash files, I can show you a way where you can use image sequences too. I've recently exported the girl animation into a PNG sequence in Flash. When you do export it into a PNG sequence from Flash, make sure there's nothing in the background. The stage color will actually not be seen in the final PNG export, so it will just read that as a transparent space and only make a render out of the girl. If you do your animation in a software that's not Flash, make sure you can render transparent image sequences. Now, we're ready to put everything together in After Effects. If you go to File and click New Composition, it'll ask you what dimensions you want, the frame rate, the background color, the duration. So I'm going for a 1920 by 800, a fake CinemaScope aspect ratio. My frame rate will be 24, a standard in animation. It's also matching all my animation files, so I'll keep 24. I'll keep my pixel aspect ratio as square pixels. Anything else like NTSC, DV, PAL, these other options are mostly for TV broadcasting, video, DVD, or camera work. As for my duration, you can choose anything, since you can specify what you want to render from your composition. But I'm gonna go for something that's short so it's easier for me to manage. So there you have it, our first composition. This is what we'll be using to make that final shot. Now you can go ahead and import those files. The easiest way to do this is have your folder open in a separate window and drag it under the project window. This is where all your assets will go, and if you choose to reuse them, you can just grab them from this column. Now, if you rendered your stuff as an image sequence, click one of the images within the image sequence. After Effects will realize that you have a bunch of other files with the same name. So there will be a tick box asking if it's an image sequence, and you can import it as a footage. That's ideal for us. Try clicking on it and dragging it to your composition window and see if everything plays out well. It might need a bit of time to render before it can play its normal speed. I don't need to see the whole portion, I just want to make sure the timing is right. So with a bit of info rendered out already, let's check it out. Okay, I think it's playing a bit too fast. If you look at the image sequence in the project window, you'll notice that it imported the file with 30 frames per second. That's too fast and I want to change it to 24. So you right click on the file, interpret footage, and click main. A new window will pop up, and if you look at the assumed frame rate, change it from 30 to 24. Click OK and see if the file plays correctly. It's a good idea to have your main project and your files have the same frame rates per second to avoid confusion. Now we have all our files set, we can finally polish our poo-poo. That's just another way on what I call this final step. Alright, we're ready to do the final part of this thing. Now we have all the files we need already imported. As you can see, they're all in a sexy 24 frames per second setting. Some are 23.975, but they're pretty much 24 frames per second to me. The first thing I want to do is slap everything in order. So I'm going to slap in my background first. As you can see, After Effects could take it in as a PSD, a Photoshop document. So just keep slapping stuff in. Slap some effects, slap some girl. I'm gonna slap the girl in first because I believe it's important to have a character do their thing. Resize them, squeeze them, make sure they fit well with your scene. Everything else like visual effects to me is for money shot purposes, but that's just how I work. Then I'm gonna add secondary important stuff like the visual effects. I'm not sure how this will look in action, but I'm just positioning all the stuff that I think might work compositionally. I'm gonna quickly see it play and see if everything works to me. So far during rendering, everything looks solid, looks like it's gonna play really well in full speed, and I love After Effects, and what the hell, she's gonna vanish, that's for sure, oh god. In the timeline, make sure you adjust your preview bar so it just matches just the girl's animation, and it will only play that bit. What's good about this is that when you render it, it'll only render this bit. So I'm just going to adjust these effects in the character, make sure it's in a composition I like, and I'm thinking, hey, we need more splatter paint effects going on. Pressing Ctrl D on a layer will duplicate what you already have. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of this splatter paint effect and put it over the girl character. I'm going to change its colors by adding a new hue effect and adjusting it through there. Oh, and if you want to add an effect, look up and you'll find effects. With whatever layer you have selected on, you can click on the effect and it'll be added to its effects properties, under effect controls in this case. So as you can see, I'm trying to apply some sort of blur so it doesn't distract the focus away from the girl, in that it gives an illusion of depth in the whole scene, even though there's no 3D mumbo jumbo going on. We'll get to that point someday. So I'm playing with blurs, and as you can see, I actually flipped the effect upside down so it gives this illusion that there's actually more variety in these effects. But then there are times where I realized, wow, that looks hella stupid, so I'll readjust and see if my earlier take was better. I always test these things back and forth to see if it plays well. The polishing the poo-poo stage is where I actually get really OCD about where things happen and go. Sometimes you can offset the timing of these layers if you make them start way earlier or way later than the other ones. This is another way to add more variety in your effects. Again, this is a stage where I get really carried away, so yeah. But if I polish my poo-poo too much, I can't get my points across. So let's move on. So I promised you guys that I'd show you how to add the lighting on the girl, and make the lighting effect that we did stay in the girl's silhouette. With the girl selected, go to the Layer tab and click Pre-Compose. It'll ask you what kind of pre-compose you want to make, but I think these settings are fine. Since we don't have any layer effects and blend modes and stuff like that, I just want my composition just to have the girl. When they're talking about attributes, they're mentioning other stuff that's like layer styles and coded stuff. But I don't have any of that, so I'll just do the first one. Now you'll notice the icon of the girl change from a flash file to a new composition. We now have a comp within a comp, and if you double click it, it'll open a new comp viewer just for that comp. Anything you do here will mostly be focused on the girl. So I'm going to select the light effect we did for the girl and slap it in her composition. Using the transform and move tool, I'm going to readjust the size of the light so it fits the girl and matches her overall contour. And once I'm done with that, I take this little box with a T on top of it. This is a transparency lock. It'll be locked to anything that's underneath it. So in this case, the light is stuck within the girl. Now the excess light is no longer showing. And if I click on the blend mode settings, I can alter the blend mode properties on how the light reacts to the girl. So for this case, I'm going to use an overlay. It's not as strong as like a screen or a color dodge. Overlays just intensifies the vibrance depending on what color you're using, which is also affected by, let's say, the color's value. Unlike the dodge and screen, which makes everything brighter, overlay intensifies things by either making it darker or lighter. I want to make this light look softer, so I'm going to duplicate this light and add a fast blur effect. This gives the illusion that the light we have is radiating around the girl. This blurred light also has its transparencies locked too, so it doesn't leave the girl. I realize I like the light, but I don't want the light to be on the girl's face. Having my initial light selected, I'm going to select a shape tool and use that shape to mask out the light on the face. The shape becomes a mask automatically if you're making a shape on top of a layer you have selected. But you have to be sure the thing you want to mask in or out is selected. Using the shape tool alone might actually just make a solid shape. For this case, everything that's within the shape will be shown, but everything that's outside will be left out, or masked out. So I'm going to draw two rectangles, one on top of her hair and the other being on her body. Now everything has light except her face. I'm going to manipulate the shape so I get a light setting that I like. For example, with the girl's body, I don't want the light to be completely on her. Maybe it'll stop after her upper chest area. And if I click this arrow to open the mask properties, I can adjust things like the mask feather to give it a nice fade effect. In the end, it works well with the other layer with the light that's blurred. Maybe the mask that has her hair could also have some feathering properties. But there you have it. As promised, that's how I did the light effect for the girl alone. And all this is just happening in her composition only. So if we actually go back to our main composition, only the girl will have the light effect that we applied, and everything else will be unaffected. Think of it like a hierarchy or a tree. On top of it all, you have one giant composition, which is your master one. Within that composition, you have many other mini comps. And within those mini comps, they have their own thing going on. If you put those mini comps and the master comp working all together, it creates some nice complex stuff you can do. That's why After Effects is fun. I'm thinking maybe I can push the girl's colors more. If I go to effects, I can find a color correction effect like curves and just play with the curve settings to get a type of color correction that I want. It's really cool because depending on how you set your curves, you can get a lot of cool different color variations. How it works is that things on the lower left apply for darker colors, while things on the upper right mostly affect colors of the lighter scale. Bending this line on the graph will affect the way these lights behave and function. With this effect, you can do things like strengthen the contrast, weaken the contrast, actually just invert the colors. Maybe she seems a bit too flat and I want to have some more lighting on her. I'm thinking some warm shadows will do the trick for her. If I go back to my girl composition, I'm gonna make a new solid object. That's if you go to layer, new, then solid. A window will pop up asking what's solid, but I'm gonna just go with a warm color, like a dark brown, and just create it. Size don't matter, because I can always resize it here in the composition window. Instead of switching it to overlay, I'm gonna use soft light, which to me is a peewee version of overlay. It's more subtle. To give it a more faded look, I'm gonna blur the shape so it has that nice fade. I'm then going to place a shadow on the lower part of the girl so it looks like light is fading away as it descends. So if we test that shit, the closer we get into it looking desirable, I guess. But I have to say, it looks a lot more vibrant and it looks less flat than it originally had, even with that light setting. I realized that the accents in the background might be stealing the scene here. So I'm doing things like duplicating the background layer, changing the blend mode to something like a lighten or darken, I'm still experimenting here, and applying a blur effect so when I do increase the amount of blurs I want, it makes the background a bit more blurrier, more foggier. I think the best way to describe it is it feels more subdued, so it doesn't steal away from the scene. I turn down the opacity of the blurred layer sometimes so the blurry effect doesn't overtake the whole background. I'll sometimes play around with changing the blend modes to add, to soft light, to color dodge, just to give you guys an example that blend modes can add a lot and can contribute to a lot of scene and decision changes. Like there might be a time where I like this blend mode over the other that I initially planned, but I know that the darken will do for now, so I'm just gonna keep it on darken. I gotta remember that I really want to show that light on darks, and having that darken layer seems pretty good enough. I want this blurred image to follow the background image for wherever it goes. In order for me to do that, I need to set a parent and child relationship between these two things. If I go under the parent column in the main timeline, I can set what I want the parent to be for the selected layer. I'm gonna make the parent of the blurred image the original background. So when I do move the original background, the blurred background will move along with it. Things like scale, position, and rotation will also be affected. I think it's time to add some lanterns hovering in the scene. When I rendered them out in SWF files, I rendered them out in pairs, because I wanted to kill two birds with one stone. But when I do move these lanterns, I want each lantern to move individually. So using the shape tools, I'm going to select the lantern I do want to move and only have that shape mask that lantern. Therefore, we only get one lantern. Now, the idea of these lanterns is that I want these lanterns to float from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. Therefore, they are floating above the girl. So if we look at the properties for the lanterns, there's one under transform. Clicking the downward arrow will showcase other options, such as position, scale, and rotation. I want to turn them all on, so I click the stopwatch icon for all three of them. This automatically sets an animation key for all those 3 properties. The stopwatch actually activates animation mode for these aspects. So I can select these diamond keys in the timeline and move them around. They already have saved information on my scale, position, and rotation. Now, if I move my marker somewhere else in the timeline and then move the lamp, it'll already start making a key. In between the initial key I made, it's already calculating frames on how much is being changed within the scale, the rotation, and the position. So when I do play it, it'll just make a straightforward move from the initial key to the last key. By the way, clicking these diamonds between the arrows actually makes a keyframe for your selected position, scale, or rotation. The arrow buttons are useful for navigating between one key to the other, since it snaps to a previous or next key. For example, I'm setting keys for the lantern to change in rotation, but I want my second key to match the second key for the position properties. So using those arrows, I can actually snap to that key and create a new key for that rotation property. So when I do play it, it's both rotating but moving. But it's doing this in ones, in a 24 frames per second timeline. Honestly, that looks uncanny and too smooth for me. I'll change that later, but first, I just want to focus on adding my lanterns. Using the same method, I'm gonna just grab my pairs of lanterns, mask out only the lantern I want, and make that shit move. So, as you can see, I've added more varieties of different lanterns and made them move by setting keys for the transformation settings. I'm gonna change it up a bit because I do feel the lanterns are just coming up in one cloudy blob of lanterns. So as more time passed, I added more variety in how far they are from each other, or do some lanterns actually leave the screen earlier from the other lanterns. But dealing with a lot of layers of lanterns is such a headache, especially in your main composition. Oh, if only there was a way to just have them all in one spot and I could just fix them from there. Boo-hoo. Well, thank the heavens, there is. If I select all my lanterns, you can do this by holding shift and clicking the lantern in the very bottom to the very top, and it'll select every lantern in between. And then I can pre-compose that shit. And it looks like I have to pre-compose all the attributes because they do have some timed animation. That's the scale, position, etc, etc. So they're all in one happy, lanterny family. But then I'm thinking, hey, maybe we can add some fancy lighting techniques on these lanterns. Kind of like I did for the girl. So when I do open that lantern to composition, there's just too many lanterns still. So let's pre-compose that sucker so that we have a pre-composition within a pre-composition, so it's another whatever. So like I did with the girl, I'm gonna make a solid and make it, let's try for a dark, cool color. So it contrasts with the girl's warm colors. Color theory! So once I have that dark blue-ish solid, I'm going to play with the blend modes. See what fancy schmancy stuff I can do with this color on the lanterns. Or balloons. I don't know what they are anymore. So with the blend mode selected, I'm going to lock the transparency so it's stuck within the silhouettes of the lanterns. Or balloons. They're lanterns. They're lanterns. Oh, I'm using a pen tool instead of a shape tool to make a new shape. It still works the same way because it's going to make a mask out of this, but I'm using the pen tool to make a very specific shape. I want the lighting to feel really dramatic, but because there's so much activity with the lanterns and the colors, I don't want it to distract. So I'm going to first turn down the opacity of the shadow and maybe feather the shadow. I'm not too sure yet. Maybe I'll give it a go. I'll see how it turns out. So yeah, let's try feathering it and see if it works with the overall finished picture. So I'm gonna go back and oh my god! I think I found a glitch and I might need to re-render my SWF file for this girl. Strangely, she looks okay in the main composition. I'll get back to that later. We'll figure that out soon. Maybe the shadows are too dark. I'm gonna play with the blend modes a bit more. So with some more experimentation, I changed the blend modes of the shadow to something like subtract, I think, and now I applied a color correction effect, like curves again. And I'm basically adjusting the curve so I can see what colors I can emphasize or make richer. You can get some gnarly cool things going on. I'm gonna constantly test play and render out quickly on how it'll look when it's moving. And I think we're getting closer to the picture I'm looking for. The colors definitely look more vibrant and rich. I don't like how flat and muddy that splash paint effect looks over the girl, so I think I'm gonna change its blend mode to something else. Maybe a color dodge. It'll overexpose the colors below it with the colors of the splash effects. I'm gonna do that for the splash effects behind the girl too, so hey, it's working really well with the lanterns actually. You know what, this looks like a finished shot already to me, but hey, let's go the extra mile. Like in Photoshop, you can add a layer style on whatever layer you want. You simply right click, layer styles, and pick the layer style you want. This is super useful if you want to do quick shadows or quick highlights on things. For me, I'm using an inner shadow one, and I'm playing a lot with the options here. I could turn this inner shadow into a highlight by, instead of having multiply as a blend mode, I could turn it into something like a linear dodge or color dodge, and change the color to something lighter. And as you can see, it's creating this rim lighting for the lanterns. If I play more with the options, such as playing with the distance of how much inner shadow there is, or how thick it is, or the size of it, I can get some pretty interesting effects. I could change the angle of these things if I want to say, hey, I want the light to come from below, or from the left, or the bottom. I said bottom already, right? Well, on the top. So when I test play it, you'll see that it actually has that rim lighting effect using the inner shadow settings. God damn, does that look cheesy. But hey, sometimes being cheesy is good. We'll roll with that. So there you have it. Here are my cheesy lit lanterns. But there's so much more we can do. Maybe if we go back to the composition with the lantern, and that creeps me out still. Actually, I'm thinking maybe we can just play with the main composition. So let's go to layer, then new, and then make an adjustment layer. Anything below the adjustment layer will be affected by the adjustment layer's properties, such as color corrections, blend mode settings, blurs, etc. So I want to somewhat blur every side of the picture. I'm going to make an oval on top of the adjustment layer so it already makes a mask. I'm going to invert it so the adjustment layer does everything outside of the oval. So I'm going to blur it, but I'm going to change the blend mode to lighten. Since the shot has somewhat an early morning feel, I kind of want to capture that fogginess during the early mornings, that misty feeling. And I realized that hollow face glitch is affecting my main composition, so I have to re-render my girl. I'll fix that later, so I'm going to play around with the mask and move it around, adjust how much of that humid feeling I want. The light and blend mode is cool because it kind of gives off a faint glow. I noticed as soon as I moved the adjustment layer under the girl, the glitch is gone, but I'm still gonna have to re-render her because that glitch really sucks and it's annoying. I'm adjusting how much of that mistiness I want, and by having more of that in the background, it's leading attention more to the girl because she's more clear, which is pretty ideal for me actually. You can actually emphasize its mistiness if you up the amount of blurriness for the adjustment layer. Again, the adjustment layer is a layer in which any effect or blend mode you put onto it will affect anything below it. So time is passing and I decided to go back to the lanterns, maybe darken the shadow effect. I'm still experimenting with different variations of how I want the whole thing to look. Maybe I like the previous take better, so I might actually go back to that later on, but let's just keep experimenting and see how much more we can do with this After Effects stage, the polishing the poo-poo stage. So going off a little off topic here, one might see this as a simple trial and error stage, but I disagree. Trial and error usually refers to something like guessing a solution for a problem. This is actually not the case. For me, it's exploring, it's experimenting with different variations on how you can get an achieved look. So any of these passes I'm doing could be the right way to go, but I know I can be exploring more, and I feel like there's a vision that's closer to than what I have. Okay, I'm gonna fix that flash animation for that girl. Thank goodness I do have a backup of that same file, so I'm just gonna quickly grab it and place it in the same folder as all my other files, and rename it so I know what the hell it is. This file is going to replace the SWF file the After Effects project is using. So if you right click the file that's glitched out in the project window, you can actually just click replace the footage and replace it with the backup or the fixed version. There's definitely a way to prevent After Effects from pulling off this kind of shit, but I'm gonna have to go back to my notes and find it because I can't remember it right now. Anyways, we're nearly there, we're getting close to the end. I'm just being an OCD asshole and making slight changes to the lighting and the lanterns and stuff. I'm resizing shadows, I'm altering colors, I'm altering the blend modes of certain effects. I'm still playing with it because this is a really fun stage when it comes to finishing a film. I'm just trying to salvage as much as I can. I think that's why some of my friends joked that this stage was called polishing the poo-poo. Because what you originally have might be really shitty, but you're doing all these After Effects mumbo jumbo to fix it and polish it so it looks pretty good. I went back and added some sort of glow element to the girl's highlights. What it is that, well, you got it, it's a duplicate of my highlights, but I didn't lock the transparency so that glow actually leaves the girl's silhouette. Again, just playing with different visual effects I can see benefit in. Maybe strengthening some colors that I feel need to be addressed so that it's not lost in all of this stuff that's happening. And that's another thing I want to address about experimenting. The way you see one thing might change because a certain effect that you add later on might change that perspective. That's why I always encourage you guys to keep experimenting. Now, remember when I showed you stock footage of some fog or smoke? So what I'm doing right now is that I'm gonna try and use the stock footage I have and implement it in my shot. I'm thinking a shot like this could use some really nice atmospheric dust effects, and I have a good footage that kinda has that dealio going on. And if I add it behind the girl, it could add more depth and texture to the overall shot. I actually got this clip from a stock footage collection called Action Essentials. It's a stock footage collection made by Video Copilot, a great place to learn After Effects and gather resources for that program. Anyways, back to the idea of me using stock footage. That's more of an aesthetic choice for me, so this is something that if you know or if you don't want to touch stock footage, that's completely fine. The purpose of this part is just to show you guys how I use stock footage to maybe enhance the shot of my animation. As you can see, I really don't like how it looks as it is. Realistic dust and smoke is fine, but honestly, it doesn't match with the aesthetic I'm going for, so I'm adding effects like posterizing it, blurring it out, make it closer to the aesthetic I'm looking for in this shot. Maybe play with the blend modes, see what works and what doesn't. Then I realized I have to be careful how I use my stock footage because it might distract from another aspect I want to show in the shot, which to me is the lighting, and I do feel like having dust might block that. So what if I rotated or flipped the image and see how the stock footage can actually help the lighting with the blend modes? Sometimes you might need to ask yourself if you're adding too much visual information in your shot. Maybe the thing you're adding is deteriorating the scene. I remember grabbing a bag of snacks, and after one bite from that snack, it was really good, there was so much flavor. Then the more I ate it, I realized I was getting sick of the snack because it was just so overwhelming, so I had to stop. I have no idea why I'm making this analogy, but I just want to say don't add too much stuff or the original intention will be lost. In other words, try not to over polish your poo-poo. Just have enough that will either contribute or enhance the scene. That's why when I look at my scene alone, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I have to make a lot of that stuff work for the scene. That's why I'm constantly playing with the blending modes here, just to make sure I get on that right median. Alright, now that I have my stylized stock footage in the scene already, I realize that when I play it, it looks so cheesy because the way the smog is moving, it's actually on ones, and I want to change the timing on the smokes so it feels like it's hand-drawn, like on twos. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click on the layer, go to time, and enable time remapping. You'll notice that two keys will appear at the beginning and the end of the clip. And that's what they basically represent, the beginning and the end of the clip. Moving them around will alter the timing of the clip. Now with the footage, I'm just going to add another key somewhere in this footage. This means that I've put a key or a specific frame within the footage. So if I move this around, the timing on the keys before and after this one will have to adjust in order to make this frame appear at a certain spot. This could cause the timing on the other keys to either slow down or speed up. But why am I using this on the smoke? The time remapping tool is a great way to change the timing into 2s, 3s, or 1s. You can use it to hold certain frames or make drawings slow in and slow out by adjusting the timing on how long each frame should be held for. This is useful when importing image sequences that doesn't have its timing down. You can actually time out your frames using this tool. Next time, I'll make a separate video on using time remapping to time your drawings, animations, among other things using the tool. Using this tool, I want to turn the smoke timing into 3s. An instant way to do this is to use the Wiggler tool. The Wiggler tool is used for making values, being transformation or effects, wiggle or shake depending on the frequency. Instead of making it shake, I wanted to add keys on the timing, in 3s. That being said, I'll turn the magnitude down to 0 and make the frequency to 8, which basically translates to every 3 frames. Now select the keys where you want it to begin and where you want it to end, and then hit apply. You'll notice that new keys will be placed in between these keys in 3s. All you need to do is instruct these keys to make sure it holds that frame. Select all these keys, right click and hit toggle hold keyframe. Now the keys will hold that frame because it's on time remapping and these keys are told to hold the time remapping. I doubt you'll see anything with this horrible capture quality, but when I show you the final result, or when you've seen the final result before, you kinda know, you'll notice it. Now I want to make a sort of vignette effect within the shot. A thing seen in old film photography. While it does make things look fancy and sort of dramatic, I want to try and use it to really push the focus on the girl, or the center of the image. Using the same techniques I did making the shadow overlay for the girl and her composition, I'm going to create a new solid that's in the dark browns range and apply a mask shape to it. An ellipse, or a circle or square, whatever suits your fancy. I'll then invert the mask so it masks out everything that is inside of the circle and fills everything that is outside of it with the solid shape. Like we've been doing earlier in this video tutorial, I'm gonna just keep playing with blend modes until I see a blend mode that works well for the shot. Then I realize, hey, this doesn't need to be a vignette. This could be a secondary effect to emphasize the lighting of the overall shot. So what I can do is click on certain points of the shape and manipulate them so I get a final form that represents the overall lighting or the shadows of the shot. So this goes back to what I've said before. I'm adding way too much stuff, but I'm trying to make it work with the lighting, a main aspect within the shot. Well, I'm just basically reminding myself not to get lost in overdoing your post-production. I'm going to say it again, and now, there is an art to polishing your crap. Putting too much glitter on it will just make it look messy. It's all about making that crap look good, or look passable at least. And that requires a lot of thinking about what you're trying to achieve within that shot. And remember, adding toppings over that thing might require you to go back to the past toppings and adjust them so they all work in harmony. I think that's the important word to think about when compositing your shot. Harmony. So you'll notice that I'm going back to my lanterns and adjusting its colors to make sure it works well with the new overlay I slapped on it. You know what? I'm nearly close to calling this shot quits. I think I'm gonna do a few more finishing touches before we conclude this long ass thing. What I like to do before I finish a shot is I create a new adjustment layer and apply a curves effect on it. This adjustment layer will act as my final color pass or color correction thing. So with this adjustment layer, I can already adjust every color you'll see in this shot. I feel like the girl could have a more active role within the shot, and I'm thinking that there's a few more things we can add on her to make her more attention-seeking. Why not add a projection effect on her, whereas some of that splash effects could hover around her like light on her surface? We can just open her pre-comp and slap in the same effects animation we did earlier for the splashes and stuff. Then like we did with the lighting effect on the girl, we can lock the transparency so it's stuck within that girl's silhouette. By now you've probably guessed it. Play with the blending mode so it feels like light. Now she looks a lot more lively and feels much closer to belonging in that world. From here on, you've probably noticed a pattern. If I add one thing, I'll have to readjust the previous things I've added. Since I don't have a tight deadline, I could just do this forever and as long as I want. But I really don't want to, and I feel like we have to conclude this thing soon. There's one final small thing I want to add. It's a very subtle camera move that moves closer to the girl's face. Since I don't have any 3D layers and I just want it to be a simple zoom, this is super easy for me to do. All you need to do is click on Layer, go to New, and create a null object. A little square object with red outlines will pop out, which is your null object. The thing about null objects is that you will not see them in the final render. It's only there to serve as a placeholder for other objects. With that being said, I'm going to parent everything in the shot to the null. This means that whatever this null does, everything else will follow. I'm going to add a simple scale change on the null alone. So when I play it, you'll notice that the null will be hidden, but everything will move because of the null. Nulls are super useful when dealing with a lot of complex movement. They're also a great way just to organize your movements in general. Like, let's say I have a bunch of background information I want to move, but I don't want to just click them individually and animate them individually with each having their own keys. I don't have to put any keys on them, and all those keyframe information can just go to a null object. So everything remains unscathed except its parent, which is the null. I try and not parent things to the null like adjustment layers, because I feel like adjustment layers affect the whole shot, and it'll just be weird having this giant adjustment square hovering around not matching the screen. So there are some things that you might want to leave out when you're nulling things. Also, I wouldn't change things that already have a parent to a null. I would just add a null and make it a parent to that parent. So that parent has a child relationship with another object, and the parent will do anything its parent will do. Oh yeah, I forgot to change the timing of my lanterns to 2s. So like I did with the smoke by turning it into 3s, I'm using the wiggle tool and turning it into 2s, so I'm changing the frequency to 12s. Then I'm holding those keys so it holds those frames. I think I'm done. I'm ready to render them. If you go to File and then you go to Export, you can add it to the render queue. This will usually open a new mini window underneath your working screen that shows a queue of assignments to render. You can adjust how it renders, its quality, and sound settings, picture size, among many other things. If you click the composition name next to the output modifier, it'll open a new window prompting you the size of the picture, the sound quality, and most importantly, file formats, picture quality. Since the QuickTime format is very common and very popular nowadays, that's what we're going to render this footage in. My default setting is AVI, but I'm going to turn it to a QuickTime format instead. Just click on the list and find QuickTime. Now click OK, close that window, and find the output module. Click on the thing that looks like a file name, and it'll open a new window on where you can export it. Notice how the file format is now a QuickTime. Name your file whatever you want and click OK. But wait, let's go back and review its render settings. I want to be sure that the format I'm rendering isn't too big, but isn't too shit of a quality. So you're going to need to choose the right compressor for it. A popular one that's great for internet viewing and maintains pretty good quality is the H.264. Usually After Effects will make a render that's uncompressed and crazy big, so we need to change that. So with the output modifier open, go to Format Options. And hey, it's already an H.264. And I do want the quality to be 100, so hey, it all looks good. I guess my job in After Effects is now done, and I can click the render button. Depending on whether you've previewed it before you rendered, it might take a while for it to render from scratch. Especially when you were working with the file at a lower quality setting, it basically needs to re-render all the information in Scratch with the higher quality. But as I speak, it's making a QuickTime format. Now, as rendering finishes, we now have our movie file. Let's play that sucker. And there you have it, the finished composition shot. You can import it into Photoshop and export it into an animated GIF, for example. Or you can just upload it as it is as a video file and put it on YouTube. Or if you're working on a short film, save it along with the other shots. But there you have it. What's that? You're not making a short, but you want to show it off to your friends as a GIF format? So if you want to show your thing as an animated GIF on Twitter or Tumblr, you can do that in Photoshop. If you go to import, you can import your video as frames. Find the clip you want to turn into an animated GIF. And if you want to turn the whole thing into a GIF, make sure you select the whole range when importing. When I hit OK, it's going to distribute your frames into Photoshop's animation layer, already timed out. Let's say I want to show this off at Tumblr. A friendly size in Tumblr is around 500 pixels wide, so I'm going to change it to that. You can do that through image size. Now to turn it into a GIF. If you go to File, click Save for Web. Bear with me, this computer sucks. A new window will pop up and it'll ask you what kind of format you want to save it in. For the umpteenth time, make sure GIF is selected because that's what you're making. Adjusting things like how many colors, dithering, and things like that can affect how big the file can be. If it's Tumblr, it's best to keep it under 2 MB. And you want it to loop, right? So make sure the looping options are forever. Now when that's all done, hit save and save that sucker. Congrats! You now have an animated GIF of your shot. Now go take over the internet. Make me proud. I wanted to show you guys all the work that usually goes into animating a shot. What I finished is a shot that lasts for 2 seconds, for a film that lasts for over 3 minutes. As a filmmaker, you have to consider all the steps you have to go through in order to get your point across. From all the shorts I've made so far, all I can say is, in the end, it's all worth it. When you realize what you can do with your skills alone, you'll realize how much you can inspire yourself. Thank you so much for following this video tutorial series. There will be more to come from the String Bang workshop.